to tell you why everybody needs to invest in the creative industries. And this is why we're hosting this Nordic Talk today. So the third and the last talk will take place on next Wednesday at 11 p.m. a.m. CST. And this is about creativity and innovation in sustainable consumption. And we encourage all of you to join this talk too. We promise you we have a great panel lined up for this one. So also I want to invite you to Creative Business Network's community, where you will meet experts, entrepreneurs, investors from all around the world, all passionate about the creative industries and all the impact and potential it holds. We will put both the invitation for the last Nordic Talk and invitation to our community in the chat. To moderate the session today, we have our very own Rasmus Tscherning, CEO of Creative Business Network. And I would now like to hand over the word to him and to our great two panelists of today.
Thank you, Helen. We just have a little bit of sound issue there. There it's gone. Excellent. Thank you, Helene, and thank you to Hedvig and George for joining us here at these Nordic Talks on investing in the creative industries, a driver for sustainable development. I will tell you more about the Creative Business Network and how we've been working with sustainability at the end of the introductions. I think we should start out with Hedvig Alexander. You are a Danish national, I believe, but you're based right now in Canada, and you are the co-founder of PartByPeople, a technology platform building digital tools and financing solution and a marketplace connecting producers and buyers in the creative manufacturing and handmade sector. But I think you can probably elaborate a bit on that. So
thank you very much.
If you would please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me here. It's very exciting. Yes, PartByPeople is it was founded to connect on a business-to-business wholesale level buyers and designers around the world to the creative and handmade makers around the world. We saw the opportunity with retail going in a direction where there is a focus on alternatives to mass production, and the handmade and creative sector has this opportunity of small batch production that used to be an impediment. You know, there wasn't the scalability necessarily, but that's now we see it as an opportunity. And so really we see our role as supporting creative manufacturers and handmade producers all over the world, making them better financed and more digital to be able to meet the demands of the buyers of the 21st century.
So you are a fan of craftsmanship and creative craftsmanship, right?
Very much so. Very much so.
And I think when I read your bio, you haven't been taking any easy solutions. You have been working in Afghanistan, and you've been building markets there, and you have added 1.6% to the Afghan GDP in 2006. That's pretty impressive. How do you do that?
Well, unfortunately, the Afghan economy was and continues to be relatively small, so it's easier to show that. But what I was trying to do back then with an organization called Building Markets was there had been a survey that showed of all the development aid that went into conflict zones post-conflict. Very, very little of it stayed in the local economy because you flew international people in, you bought things abroad, and so the benefit to the economy was actually very minimal. And so we were trying to figure out how can we connect the local business community to opportunities in the country. And so the 1.6% largely was done because I managed to, our team managed to convince American General that instead of flying in tomatoes from Kentucky and water in from Dubai, that why don't we set up a vegetable manufacturing factory in Afghanistan and similarly a water processing manufacturing plant. And these things alone actually was able to make this, along with a lot of other things in construction and medical supplies and others. But you know, even of course, Afghanistan doesn't produce a lot of things, but even having it go through local companies and local sourcing contracts makes an incredible impact. And so I think we have to be very aware of that when we go in to try to build economies, that we are actually building the economy.
Yeah, that we're not just flying in the people. George, George Gegachara, you're the managing partner at the HEVA Fund. I was so lucky to meet you in 2019, I believe, in Brussels for the Culture for Futures. So I know you have an affinity for culture and arts. You're a writer, you're a filmmaker, and a thought leader. You're based in Nairobi, if I remember correctly, in Kenya. And as I said, you're heading the HEVA Fund. But tell us a bit more about the HEVA Fund and also about yourself, how you arrived as head of the HEVA Fund.
Thank you so much, Rasmus. It's a pleasure to meet you in very odd circumstances. Now we have to meet across the internet because we're dealing with a pandemic. But it was really a pleasure to be part of the conversations with the Creative Business Network a couple of years ago. I'm happy to be in this conversation. I'm still at the HEVA Fund. For those that do not know about HEVA Fund is finance, business support, and research facility for culture and creative industries here in East Africa. Since 2013, when we were set up, we've worked hard to generate specific insights. We've rolled out investments. We have innovated financial models that are designed specifically for the growth of the creative industries in Kenya, in East Africa, and in the African continent. We've been able to invest in more than 60 creative businesses in 5 countries, directly supported over 8,000 creative practitioners in fashion, digital content, television, live music, gaming, culture, and creative industries, even the emerging ones. And because of that, we believe that we are at the forefront of helping producers of cultural goods and services to build high-value businesses, profitable businesses where new ideas will come to life, where the highest potential for great profits will be found, where we shall also generate great jobs and happy people. And because of that, I think the culture and creative industries will really contribute to, I guess, this entire discourse of sustainable development. I know Rasmus has requested that I comment as to how I found myself here. I didn't set out to be a fund manager, and hopefully I won't be a fund manager for too long. I'm only here on loan. Back in the first decade of the 21st century, we set up a culture production house that was a multimedia arts collective and production house called the Nest Collective, which is my primary entry into the world of creative support. And so for many years,
isn't that a co-working space now, the Nest Collective in Nairobi?
Well, we've had a co-working space, we've had a guerrilla radio station, we've had a television, an online television station. So it's really a production space for artists, and that's what together with my friends we founded. And one of the questions that we were trying to address is definitely the question of creative excellence. And the second question was sustainability and finance within the culture and creative industries. And I guess the exploration of trying to set up a local resource for creative industries led us to many experiments that finally became what HEVA Fund has become. So this is a 7-year experiment. It seems to go very well. We hope that it can impact this generation, and with a bit more diligence, we can leave it to be a resource for another generation as we proceed to do other things as life would have us do. So thank you for your invitation, and thank you for your kind introduction.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Hedvig. So as you know, my name is Rasmus. I'm head of CBN and the Creative Business Network, and we have some great partnerships around the world, close to 80 national partners Also, from the very beginning in 2012, Kenya joined us with the Creative Business Cup Kenya and sent a startup to Copenhagen in November. I remember it was a 17-year-old young Kenyan man who came to pitch in Copenhagen, first time he left Kenya. And coming to Copenhagen in November was a good experience for him. Now we're going to dive a bit into the subject area, investing in the creative industries and also the subject of sustainable development. And I just wanted to give an idea of what we're talking about. It is both sustainable solutions to some of the more traditional industries. For example, in 2013, we had an Italian startup that came second or third called Orange Fiber. Orange Fiber still exists, and they actually work with orange pulp, what is left when you make orange juice, and they turn that into textile that is then used in clothing. So it's using a waste product and turning it into clothing. That was Orange Fiber from Italy in 2013. In 2017, we have from Israel, Algalife, that used seaweed, they use seaweed to produce also textiles. They won that year, or was it just early 2018, the H&M Sustainability Award, Innovation Award, the same company, Algalife from Israel. And then in 2019 came Chioma Ogbut-Imka from Nigeria. She has a company called Red Button, where she actually works with water lilies as the product as a source for making her textiles. We've also seen from Kenya, Discover Brand and Dennis Mikini, who worked with how to take plastic, to start a recycling system for plastic in Kenya, and turn that plastic into fillers for 3D printing. And he then, when the Corona crisis came, turned that 3D printing into how to make masks and other stuff that the health personnel would be needing during the Corona crisis. So we're talking about something that we've seen startups been doing in the Creative Business Cup since the very, very beginning. And we continue to see these great ideas from around the world, from the innovative startups. I also want to point out that in 2014, we had Unkept, which was a German supermarket chain. It was a startup that would not have any packaging at all. So when you would go to the supermarket, you would have to bring your own little bags or containers to put stuff in. For example, if you would buy toothpaste, you would buy these little pellets, these little small pea-sized pieces of toothpaste that then you could put in a bag and take home with you. So we've seen, as we always do, the innovation and the desire for change and better solutions. They come from startups, and they come from startups in the creative industries. I also think, and we can discuss that soon, that the culture and creative industries, and now I added culture, often are very powerful tools or companies or actions. These are industries that are infused with a lot of symbolic value. George, as a filmmaker, that a movie is not just a movie. It touches people. It goes under the skin, into the hearts. I had a friend have a nervous breakdown and had to go to therapy after he'd seen the movie Festen, which is one of the Dogma movies that was produced back, I think it's 10, 15 years ago now. We also saw people getting killed around the world when a Danish cartoonist made a cartoon with the prophet. First of all, he drew the prophet, and he drew the prophet with a bomb in his turban. And that created a lot of trouble for Denmark, of course, around the world, and also the beheading recently of a school teacher in France. So, and you could say these are just cartoons. This is just a drawing, but in general, the creative industries carry a lot of value and a lot of symbolic value that can actually also make people do different things. At the central station in Copenhagen, for years we've been playing classical music to scare the homeless people away. So in certain areas of the central station, they play loud classical music, and then the homeless will leave. When we were constructing the metro in Copenhagen, we played German marching music in certain areas where we had to make sure that people would walk quickly from one area to the other. And as you maybe know from the book Predictably Irrational, if you're in a supermarket and you have to choose between an Italian wine or a French wine, your choice will be dependent on the music that they're playing. If they're playing French music, you will choose a French wine. If they're playing Italian music, you will choose an Italian wine, all things equal. With these examples, I want to say that the creative industries are not just shoes and clothes and fun and games. It's actually also services and products that start revolutions and or at least make us talk about a revolution and change. It's also difficult sometimes to invest in them. That's something we have been also discussing here in the Creative Business Network. We have a network of investors called the Creative Business Investors, because if we have met Steven Spielberg before he had made any movies at all, we wouldn't really know if he would be a great movie maker, would we? We can't really. It's difficult to invest in these creative, intangible ideas of the creative entrepreneurs or the creatives. That's quite different. If you have 100 cows that produce milk, and you go to the bank and say, I would like to loan some money for another 50 or 100 cows to produce more milk, the bank will know that, hey, there is something where we can keep some collateral in, but that's really difficult if you come and say, I have a great idea for a fashion collection that will be a smashing hit that everyone will buy. So there are certain economic properties to the creative industries that makes it difficult to invest in them. And when it makes it difficult to invest in them, then we don't get those solutions, and then we don't get the solutions that are related to the sustainable development. Maybe that was a bit long, windy road, but what I was trying to say is it's difficult to invest in the creative industries. Thus, we see fewer solutions proposed by the creative industries than we could. Yeah, let's start with that. Let's start. Hedvig, did this? So have you, when you look at the creative industries, for some it's a new concept. What do we mean? Is it really one sector? Yes or no? But you also from working with the creators and those that work with craftsmanship, can you see why it's difficult? And do you have some ideas of what can be done about it?
I think in our sector, of course, so our platform is trying to match, buyers, mainstream buyers, non-mainstream buyers with the creative manufacturing industry, which is, what is that really that small batch producer that has a high element of handmade in their production around the world, typically in lower middle income countries, as it happens to be. But there's also now a huge amount of obviously handmade producers in Europe and North America and other parts of Asia. So it is a very, very fast-growing industry, actually, and there's definitely a desire on the buyer side to engage with them. I think
isn't it also something about buying local, that you want something that's made place specific?
I think it is, but I think at the end of the day, buyers want to buy things in a certain way. There has to be no friction. It has to be easy. It has to fit with their payment terms. And so I think I think us who care about these things, why are we involved in the industry? We have all kinds of reasons. We really believe that culture is important for identity, for belonging. We think it's sustainable. We know that 80% of handmade businesses in Africa, for example, are run by women, and they touch 10% of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So there's lots of reasons that we want to push the sector, but you have to put yourself, in our case, in the buyer's shoes. What's going to make them choose these type of products over others. And of course, one thing is the product itself, but a very big part of it is to make the journey, and here I'm talking about the discovery, the communication, the order process, the terms of the buy, the shipping, has to be the return policy. It has to be packaged in a mainstream way, so it makes the buyer, it makes it just as easy for the buyer to buy this as anywhere else. And I think that's where sometimes, certainly of course, George is covering a much broader aspect of the creative industry. We are specifically looking at handmade physical products. And so I think where we have been not so successful previously, and what we are trying as a startup to change, is we've talked a lot about all these wonderful things that we like about the industry. And the buyers say, yeah, that's wonderful. But if it isn't easy to find, if it isn't easy to buy, if they can't offer you net 30 or net 60 payment terms as they get with any other vendor, then it's not really possible for them to buy, because a buyer is partly commission paid. And if he or she doesn't have the products on the shelf on the 15th of October, the Christmas sale is over. So I think we have to focus much more. We can know why we are involved and why it stimulates us, but we have to think about all the friction that could be there and all the risk that's perceived to be involved in this sector, and remove that and make it just as easy and steady and riskless. So, whereas we are involved in the sector because we find it inspiring, the people, the products, it's really very much about operations and logistics. How are we going to package these wonderful creators and products in a way that is easy, mainstream, acceptable to the market? That's really the conversation that needs to be had, I think.
Mm. You said one of the things was discovery, and you made me think of that I met Bolanle Austin Peters. She's a film producer. She also runs an art center in Lagos, and she had directed the movie called Bling Lagosians. And I had actually been on Netflix for many years, and I've seen Family Guy. Now I'm watching The Crown and all that. And what an octopus taught me. But then when I saw the Bling Lagosians, and then I suddenly discovered that there was actually a whole, to me, it was a hidden section. All I had to do was to type Nigeria in the search field, and then suddenly I discovered that there were 30 or 40 or 50 different titles produced in Nigeria. And I think a lot of this, that is also part of us as consumers, the discovery, just as investors, to discover these opportunities must be quite difficult unless you know what to look for, or you by chance meet someone.
It's very difficult. That's why our platform, I mean, what is a platform? A platform is a place where you have a lot of users, for, in our case, producers, brands, and buyers in one place, and where you can aggregate certain services and make this process easier and more scalable. That's really what a platform does. And so, of course, that's what we are really trying to do. As Airbnb is the platform for hosts, yes, the person that stays in the Airbnb is number one stakeholder and the reason why Airbnb is successful, but they really see themselves as a place for hosts, as a community for hosts. And we do that too at PartByPeople. We are a platform for the vendors, the makers, the design studios all over the world. And we need to get as many of them into one place, organize them in a way and merchandise them in a way where they're searchable. So any kind of buyer that goes to find, whether it's tableware or garden furniture or textiles or accessories, can find these things in an easy, mainstream, and in a searchable way that is as if you would go into any other site that sort of works along the algorithms and the way people and buyers think.
Mm-hmm. George, I noticed that you take a word in your mouth that I'm usually very careful to use, and that's the word cultural. We often say the culture and creative industries, but usually when I'm in sessions like this, and especially if we might have some investors listening, I'm not going to scare them away by using the word cultural, but you use it. I suppose that the HEVA fund, you have discovered that it's not dangerous to also say that this is also arts, it's also artists that actually create business, that create stuff or products and services that are investable, that you can actually get a return on after a while. So tell me, George, the HEVA fund, what areas do you invest in the creative, cultural and creative industries?
Thank you. I have two responses before I go to your most recent question. So investment is context specific. So maybe investors in Europe are afraid of the word culture, but in my field of practice, it's not yet a bad word. If it becomes one, we'll let you know. I think the context in which I operate informs the kind of work that we do. And I'd like to probably just share a bit of that context. The previous speaker mentioned the processes at the point where the buyer meets the product, and talked about the logistics, the presentation, the conveniences that allow a customer to invest in a product through buying. I feel that I respect that, but I also respect that before we get to the shop front, there are a couple of things that have to be in order and have to be in place for that conversation at the shop front to be possible. And in my context, our investment takes a view of what we call the value chain. Because while in some regions we have fairly developed supply chains, we have fairly developed path to market for creative and cultural products, we find ourselves in a context where we have to invest in the entire value chain so that with time we can professionalize, we can be able to give those guarantees that are needed so that that relationship can be established. However, I would like to say that investment, as we've come to find out in the last 10 years of our practice, is also informed by context. I'll give you an example. We have about 450 million young people below the age of 30 in the East African board of Kenya, of the East African board of the continent, and they wear jeans every day and they wear t-shirts every day. I dare say that the opportunity we do not have a lack of opportunity. We just have a unique market condition that makes it difficult for local producers to compete effectively to clothe even a subsection of the 450 million young people who enjoy faded jeans. Because in this side of the market, Europe, America, and some part of Asia, they bring secondhand clothing. And secondhand clothing distorts the market. And so a fashion producer in East Africa cannot compete with free clothing that's dumped in the region in the name of charity or whatever else. So there's no fashion market because there's a dumping of commodity because Europe has to find a way to dump its fast fashion after its off-season. So that is a very unique market condition. And there's not an amount of incubator or hand-holding that can help bridge the competitiveness of a fashion subsector. So we have to find other sectors, and that's why we go into culture. We have to go to places where either the Bangladeshi, American-owned factory cannot compete. When you talk about gaming, which is fast growing, AI and gaming is the fastest growing in Europe, which is called creative, and that's where a lot of money is moving. You find that people who are making games are making games in under a huge financed infrastructure and finance for numerous series of funding from private equity to create a universe, game universe, that are sold through exclusive platforms, like the gaming platforms we buy for our kids that I have in my house here. And those platforms are closed so that they can only commercially exploit the intellectual property of these industries. So we have market structures that dictate culture and creative production, and those influence investing. And so for us, we found the need to create new models so that then we can invest in the opportunity that's available in our region. And so to go directly to your most recent question, so what do we invest in? We've invested in anything between garment production that focuses, say, on school uniforms, because we find school uniforms do not suffer from the market distortion that I mentioned previously. We invest in gaming development that is for mobile phones, because we find that a lot of consumers in our region are mobile first before they are console first. We invest in fibers, because we found that if you have to make unique clothing in this region, you have to start from the fabric itself. And so we have people from making different types of fabrics, using different techniques, different natural pigments to color, all the way to the garments that we export to different parts of the world. We invest in platforms like local versions of Netflix and music selling platforms that do not rely on this international algorithm and the pay gap that is behind this large collecting and distribution platforms. So we have over 50, growing to about 100 companies. Some of them are early stage, and a lot of them are in the growth level, which is a medium stage. And we are starting to see a renaissance of cultural production. And when I say cultural production, I mean everything that you would call creative. But because we borrow heavily from our local languages, we borrow heavily from our local aesthetics. I'm wearing a shirt that's a designer who sells globally, but uses designs and patterns from their traditional culture to make such shirts. So we call them also creative as much as they are cultural. So that's my quick answer to what we invest in. But we found it is important not only to just look at the patterns that are in other cultures, but to start to look at how do we innovate financial models that look at the kind of ticket sizes that our consumers consume, the business cycles that we have, and not only the business cycles, but the levels of business that we have in the ecosystem. Because I am told that in some contexts, when you talk about investment, you talk about $1 million to $50 million in investment. But for us, we have investments from $30,000 for the seed level. We have the $100,000 level for the early stage, and we have the $300,000 for the medium groups. And they can take this in debt format, they can take this in equity, pseudo equity, until they're able to build business traction for them to dream big. I will stop there so that I can allow my colleagues to interact with some of the thoughts that I have presented. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I'm glad you mentioned your shirt also, because at some point Hedvig also talked about identity, and I think that's also an element that we have to remember with the culture and creative industries, is that we can use them, and we do use them as a way to build an identity. It's the stories that we tell to ourselves, about ourselves, and to the rest of the world, by the clothes that we wear, the music that we listen to, the books that we read, the media that we consume, etc. It's part of developing meaning and who we are. You said you invested in games, and I was wondering if it's any kind of games, or is it games with a purpose, you could say? Is it where there is an impact? I don't know if you knew, but actually Angry Birds was launched in the International Space Station by some astronauts. And the idea originally with Angry Birds was to teach kids about physics. And there's actually, if you go to YouTube and type Angry Birds, you can find a lot of astronauts from NASA talking about issues related to space and physics using Angry Birds. We have also discovered that, again, since it builds identity, that a lot of the games that we see today, the hero is usually male and usually white. Do you try to influence the stories, the narratives, or maybe not influence, but do you select according to something that's maybe more diverse and more inclusive than what we usually see?
Well, thank you for that intervention. And I think the question you're asking, what are the ethics behind our investments, and do we practice the ethics through our dollars? I'd like to start by saying that HEVA fund was not an ordinary or a regular private equity. So we are not a division of a bank or a division of a family investment house. We were created.
But you do take equity.
Yes, we were created by an arts company, by a collective of artists who made money and who decided that because they couldn't find money in the ecosystem, they would invest their money in the ecosystem. And so we come with a lot of affection for aesthetics. We come with a lot of affection for our community and how we see our community working. And what is the implication of this? The implication of this is first on the design of our financial models. I'll give you an example. If you walk to any private investment bank in this continent, you will not find the kind of financial models that we have. We have financial models that respond to specific business cycles. So if you're a fashion designer who sells school uniform, we can give you a facility that allows you to pay only when you earn, and that can also finance up to 90% of your orders, so that when you have most orders, you have the most resources coming to you, and when you have the least resources coming in the season when you're not selling, we do not expect you to go into your pocket and pay. While this is a webinar and I don't have a lot of time to share the specifics of the financial models, that is one way we have moved our ethics into financial innovation. Another way is in our business evaluation panel. A lot of investors start with the money. We start with a creative panel, which is the business identification panel. They look at the aesthetics, they look at the sustainable practices, they look at the shareholding, whether there is gender, culture, IP, ethics, and practices that can be promoted, and only then do they recommend it to a financial evaluation panel. So the first ask that looks at every of our deals is a panel of peers who are not competing and who look at the best practices. And we have had the privilege of investing in only the best businesses that treat their workers the best, that treat the environment fairly, and that plow back to the society. And finally, the big question of gender. The fund itself is conscious about gender, is conscious about integration of people with different identities, but it is also conscious about integrating cultural diversity. And we've done that through how we recruit and how we also invest. If you look at our last annual report, we report on all these items, ESG, but also culturally specific metrics of looking at gender, looking at cultural diversity, looking at language diversity, looking at cultural archives, intellectual property, and so on and so forth. So we are a real creative and cultural fund, not just a PE fund that has an asset class that is based on culture.
That's a fantastic case. Our Creative Business Network Africa, we have about 18 or 20 partners in Africa, and we can really see how there's more and more happening in this field, and also more financing opportunities. From Canada, we actually have one of the largest, or it was until the pandemic, creative companies come. And I'm talking about Cirque du Soleil. Cirque du Soleil actually was the first 11 years of its existence funded by the Canadian Arts Council. It was an arts project that was run by, invented by a guy whose main, at the time, competence was to walk on stilts. And from that cultural project grew then Cirque du Soleil, that had, before the pandemic, I think something like 9,000 employees, and they partnered with the Mirage hotels in Las Vegas and in Florida, and did all these different, both touring, and they actually did a whole reinvention of the circus. They removed poodles that had to jump through rings of fire, and they removed the stars, the clowns, and did some really good stuff. It's going to be interesting to see what is left of Cirque du Soleil now that we're edging our way out of the pandemic, and it will be interesting to see how the legacy of Cirque du Soleil will continue. There is actually an accelerator and an incubator in Montreal called ZU, Z as in zebra and U as in uniform, where Guillaume Therrien is the CEO, and they are trying to continue and supporting startups in the experience economy, so to speak, or in the events, etc. I would like to ask you, Hedvig, it can be difficult, if you look at here, you have a guy walking on stilts, and for 11 years he receives most of his revenue from an arts council. What do you need as an investor? What are you looking for, or what do you think we should be looking for when we want to find those next Cirque du Soleils? And not necessarily because they're big, etc., but they do provide jobs. They do provide innovation in a lot of areas. But how do we find the gems, the stuff that really can make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why the creative industry has been underfunded is probably, I imagine, I mean, we have been lucky enough to find investors for PartByPeople, but we were also second-time entrepreneurs, and we had a few things that helped us, explain this vision and show some track record that could help investors imagine what it is we were trying to build. But I would imagine, I mean, if you sort of we haven't taken many institutional investors. We've mostly gone with wealthy private individuals, and and impact investors and angels at the stage where we are, which is sort of seed. But I would imagine that, most venture funds, I'm sure this is changing, but I imagine it's a new thing, didn't have a lot of, the average Wall Street or City of London banker isn't coming from the creative industry, right? I mean, it's interesting. One of a person I know who has been running Oliver Wyman, one of the big banking consulting companies, has just been, is now going to run the British Council. So I think there are beginning to be some overlaps between the two, but I imagine that's fairly new. And so, of course, investors largely invest in things they can imagine, and that means something they've seen before, where there's a track record, where, and so I imagine a part of it was just that people didn't understand the creative industry enough and the growth pattern.
Yeah, and it's kind of contrary what you just that the creative industries, when they're successful, there's novelty, there's something new, there's something you haven't seen before.
Exactly, but I think so. It's maybe up to, and I'm sure that's what has partly been the success of George is how do you. It's a little bit again what I said before, that to present the products we want to sell to buyers, we have to show them as they are, but we have to package them in a mainstream way so the buyer can understand the process. I think with the investment, saying what are the levers that most investors are really looking for? How can we translate those, even though it's in the creative industry, and show the investment in a slightly more mainstream way? And I don't mean mainstream in a bad way. I mean, just obviously creative and cultural are per definition often not mainstream, and that's, as you said before, that's what we like about them. There's novelty, that's new, but I still think there are a way to package this in a way that's a bit more streamlined and can seem not too eccentric to the investor. And of course, once you have a few successes, then you can build on those, and then the ball sort of starts rolling. But for example, for our producers, if you look at handmade and creative manufacturers all over the world, they're 95%, and here we're talking about between 300 and 400 million people globally. It's a massive sector. They are 95% self-financed. Why is that? It's clearly not by choice, but it's because the kind of collateral that financial institutions are looking for to give you inventory financing, warehouse financing, purchase order financing is what you own. What is the kind of collateral we can come and leverage if something goes wrong? And of course, many of these people don't own those types of collateral. So this is where our financing is not based on that. We are financing people based on their reputation and their ability to produce and deliver a product on time. So of course, it's much more data oriented. And again, with the platform, you have that opportunity. So I think we have to educate investors and finance institutions to see us and our industry in a different way.
And see the opportunities. I'm gonna just comment on that. I just want to say to all of us, all three of us, that we have to answer the question based on what we've learned today. What key action points do we want to highlight? So I ask you, Hedvig, and you, George, to think about that. What key action points do you want to highlight? You made me think of an article I read in The Economist, I think it's 10, 15 years back, about HBO, why HBO was so successful. And one of the reasons why they had the success, they were able to invest in something that was new and novel. And they specifically, the article talked about, what's it called, 6 Feet Under or 8 Feet Under? I think it was 6 Feet Under. So this, when they pitched it, it was a TV series about a depressed gay funeral director. So that doesn't really seem like a successful TV series. But when they pitched it to HBO, then they said, that's great, let's make it weirder. And so for investors to believe that a story about a gay depressed funeral director can actually be a global hit, that takes a lot of guts also, I think, from the investor side. But George, what would you like to highlight of action points that we can take, either you personally or we the people that have been participating in this webinar and in the Nordic Talks?
Well, thank you. Two things that are clear in my mind that the creative producers are the first investors. They've invested in their skill, they've invested in their time, they've taken money from their family, from their food, from whatever, to start their businesses. So we do not have lack of investors. We already have people who have taken the first risk on this sector. All we need is people who take the second risk and the third risk and the fourth risk in numerous cycles, just like they do in other ecosystems. So I'm already in my action plan because I did not wait to be for someone to take risk on me. I'm taking a risk on others. So the first thing is that we need to, and I guess there are numerous audiences for culture and creative practitioners, those that already have taken a risk. The action point for them is to be bold, to start to be bold and to walk into those doors, especially those that they're most afraid of, because there's some lack of investment happens because we do not have familiarity, there's no sharing of knowledge, or we're not part of the same network. So I think people should take a bit more courage and knock on those doors and not give up. The second thing is the power of networking, the power of putting coins together, the power of cooperative movements, the power of leveraging the coins that are within the network that we have, even before we get that big investor from somewhere else. So if we can start keeping our records, having to start some level of formalization that an outsider, if we need the money from the outsider to look at us as viable entities, then that is our job as creative and cultural producers. And I think a lot of people have already spoken to creative and cultural producers and made them to feel as if they don't do much. They already have produced the shirts, they've already produced the culture. So I need to speak to this other class of investors who talk about risk, who talk about sort of like there are better opportunities in other asset classes. So I think that's a bit lazy. For any investor who, especially if you're thinking about the third world, if you're thinking about global south, if you're thinking about 1.3 billion people who have a median age of 19, who will be the most populous group of people 2030 into 100 years in. If you want to engage with Africa and the global south, you have to engage from a place of supporting culture and creative industries, because if you want other sectors, they've already been captured by the Chinese and the Americans. But the culture and creative industries is where real young people who are connected to communities, who are growing in their influence, who are making money and who are influencing their culture, that's where they're producing, that's where they're making their cities vibrant, and that's where they're capturing the minds and hearts of the next generation. So it would be lazy for investors to think that that is a place where the risk is concentrated.
And I think it's easier to be bold. So you're encouraged for boldness and network, and in the network you find trust. And I think if I can be more easily bold investing in something if you are also investing in it, George. So that kind of networking is good. Hedvig, what is your key points, the action points, stuff we can do from this webinar? You need to unmute.
Sorry. I forgot to mute myself. Sorry. I mean, of course, in a very narrow sense, I agree with everything that George is saying. You need that bigger view, and where do we really want to go, and what society do we want to live in. I think on a very practical note for us at PartByPeople, obviously would encourage, Danish buyers to get involved with us and go on, help us, help them source differently. and more sustainably, and in a way that's in line with the SDGs and with social justice in general. So that would be my challenge. We're also very interested in hearing from Danish designers who are interested in working with handmade producers to help them create, more contemporary collections with their traditional skills. And of course, all of this, why should we do that? Yes, we create more beautiful products and more value, but I think also, again, if we are really serious about hitting the SDGs by 2030, there is the creative sector is instrumental. We will not hit the sustainable development goals without the creative manufacturing, handmade industry, for sure, and the creative industry in a broader way. So I think that I would be a little bit, more narrow in my request.
Mm. Thank you, Hedvig. We have about 2 minutes left, so we also have a question in the chat about where do you go if you want to develop creative industries policies, and I can tell you should go to cbnet.com. We actually have several webinars on how to place the creative industries on top of the political agenda, and we have actually also here in June a whole academy session with I think it's about 30 hours of classes on how to develop the creative industries. And if I have to say an action point, it will be I have to keep being curious and looking for the corners of all these platforms and finding new stuff that can surprise me. So it's not just that the only Korean song I know is Gangnam Style, and that we have to be more bold in our discovery of creative stuff. We have now 1 minute left of these Nordic talks, and just to remind you guys that the Nordic countries, it's Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, and also the two dependencies, Faroe Islands and Greenland, that they make out the Nordic region. And it's actually the Nordic Council of Ministers that have chosen to support us in making these 3 Nordic talks on these different areas, all related to the cultural and creative industries. We have about a minute left, and I think now we need to run a video, if I'm not mistaken. You see a link here in the chat. Now I want to say thank you to George Gegachara and to Hedvig Alexander. Thank you both of you for being part of this webinar. It was a pleasure speaking to you. We should meet soon after again. I hope we can also meet in person. That would be a great pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. Appreciate it.